In every corner of the United Kingdom and in every shadowed place across the world, there are stories the daylight can't explain. Whispers of figures that vanish into thin air, footsteps that follow when you're alone, and encounters with the paranormal that leave the living forever changed. On the Haunted UK podcast, we journey into these mysteries, exploring chilling accounts of hauntings, terrifying paranormal events, and real stories from listeners who've witnessed the impossible. Each episode is crafted with immersive soundscapes, meticulous research, and storytelling that pulls you straight into the dark. So if you're captivated by the unexplained, if you seek the truth behind the world's most haunting experiences, then follow us, carefully. Because once you begin listening, you may start to hear things too. The Haunted UK podcast, available now on all major podcast platforms.
There are very few moments in daily life when we are as unguarded as we are when we're asleep. No matter how strong, aware, or prepared we believe ourselves to be during the day, night demands that we surrender. As we close our eyes and begin to sleep, we willingly abandon control of our surroundings for hours at a time. And for most people, this vulnerability is so familiar that it becomes invisible. We trust the walls around us, the locks on our doors, the quiet rhythms of our home. Yet, sleep is also the point at which we lose our ability to monitor the world around us. We no longer hear every sound with clarity or recognize every shift in the air. Our sense of danger softens, replaced by the belief that nothing will happen whilst we're unconscious. And most of the time, that trust is justified. Although, even then, a small part of our mind is acutely aware of just how exposed it is when we lie still in a dark room. And this is why stories of intruders, stalkers, and home invasions often strike us so deeply. They target the quiet fear that someone else could be in the house without us knowing, hiding amongst the blind spots created when we sleep. However, it is worth noting that within psychology, this fear isn't considered irrational at all. In fact, it is an evolutionary response to the loss of vigilance that kept our ancestors alive for many years, now existing as a leftover survival instinct from a time when being unaware of one's surroundings carried far greater risks. Many people report moments of unease without any obvious threat, describing a feeling of being watched or a sensation that the room has changed somehow. Most of the time, of course, there's nothing there. And yet, the unease remains, simply due to the very idea of it being a possibility. The idea that you could be asleep whilst an invader is in your home is one of the most universal fears humans share. And it's from this very fear that one particular urban legend emerged. A story that plays not on ghosts or monsters, but on the simple, horrifying possibility that the comfort we reach for in the dark might not be what we think it is. My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is Humans Can Lick Too. For many people, that sense of vulnerability we feel at night can be significantly softened by the very presence of an animal. A pet in the home can act as living reassurance, a reminder that we are not entirely alone in our space. Dogs, in particular, are a perfect example of this, being big and tough enough to sit right at the intersection of companionship and protection. In many ways, they are living alarm systems, keeping us safe. But on top of that, they are also family members, loving creatures that have been woven into the emotional fabric of the household. In fact, psychologists and sleep researchers have even noted that this relationship is not just emotional, but physiological. Studies have found that interacting with a familiar dog can lower heart rates, blood pressure, and can even increase levels of oxytocin, a hormone associated with bonding and relaxation. In practical terms, that means a dog's presence can help reduce anxiety and promote a feeling of calm. For people who live alone or who struggle with anxious thoughts at night, the simple knowledge that a trusted animal is nearby often makes it easier to fall asleep and stay asleep. There's also the more specific question of sharing a bedroom or even a bed with a pet. Research on co-sleeping with animals suggests a mixed picture in purely mechanical terms. Some people do experience more fragmented sleep because of movements, snoring, or the animal getting on and off the bed. Yet, when they are asked how they feel about it, many report a greater sense of comfort and security overall, making it a fair trade, with the emotional safety they gain from having the dog close often outweighing any minor disturbance. On a practical level, dogs have long been used as guardians of the night. They hear things we cannot, react faster than we do, and are far more likely to pick up on subtle changes in the environment. Even if their role is purely symbolic in modern homes, they still occupy the psychological position as the first line of defense. If something were wrong, we tell ourselves, the dog would know, alerting us with a bark or a growl. This suggests that when we lie in bed and reach a hand down to where the pet usually sleeps, we are not just seeking contact. We are, in some ways, reaching for reassurance. We are confirming that the familiar shape is still there and that the house is very much as it should be, even as we've closed our eyes from it all. But what if the very thing that had changed was the dog itself? In my telling of the Humans Can Lick Too urban legend, we will follow Rachel, who's been home alone with her dog for far too long. It'd been a long week, and an even longer weekend for Rachel, who had spent her entire Saturday catching up on the heavy workload she had accumulated at work. It felt as though, no matter how much she did, it was never enough, and the consistent piles of punishing paperwork was ever expanding. Buddy, her little aging pug, didn't mind though, simply slumped beside her the entire day like a lost potato. As far as he was concerned, it had been a relaxed, perfect weekend of sleep and welcome rest. Now, it was Sunday evening, and Rachel had finally finished up her work for the week, spending the rest of the afternoon cleaning the house as much as she could before collapsing on the sofa to watch her favourite show. After making herself some beans on toast and letting Buddy out for his final toilet break of the night, she crawled her way up the stairs and began to brush her teeth, studying her tired eyes in the mirror that stared back at her without any glimmer of a spark. Was she depressed? Or just overly exhausted? She couldn't tell. All she knew was that she was already feeling the creeping dread of Monday morning weighing down her stomach. Her mind was already racing as she contemplated all the things she needed to get sorted before the end of the week. It was relentless. Outside of her time with Buddy, she had little to no time for anything else. In many ways, he forced her to step away from her screen for a little while, ensuring she stepped out into the garden to throw the ball around and get some needed fresh air. That said, his sudden bursts of energy and need for attention weren't always well-timed, and by the way he was standing in the doorway, grumbling at her as she scrubbed her teeth, she could already feel this was going to be one of those occasions. She tried to avoid eye contact, studying him in the mirror as he watched her, his grumbles getting louder, edging dangerously close to a bark. Rachel finally turned to face him, holding her toothbrush still in her mouth as she extended her finger. "No," she exclaimed firmly, staring down at him. Although, this only seemed to excite him more as he charged back and forth up the hallway, ready for a nightly adventure. Instead, he got a few scratches at the back of his ear as Rachel finished her nightly routine and got into bed. He did manage to get some semblance of attention and play though, as luckily for him, Rachel had decided to slip in one more episode of her show before going to sleep, giving herself a little more time to unwind. Although, she only managed 5 minutes or so before Buddy suddenly lunged from his bed, knocking her laptop to the floor. She growled his name back at him as he sharply darted out of the room, violently barking up the landing as he charged towards the stairway. Rachel yanked her laptop from the ground, quickly inspecting every corner of it to ensure it worked. Luckily for her, and luckily for Buddy, nothing was damaged. With a deep exhale, Rachel flung herself out of bed and charged to the stairway where Buddy stood, staring down into the darkness, still barking and growling at the shadows. She called for him to shut up, anxious not to wake the neighbors with his shrill yaps, although he didn't listen, completely focused on the darkness below. She flicked the light on the wall, illuminating the living room below as she slowly made her way down them to inspect what the hell he was yapping on about. This had seemingly given Buddy an extra burst of confidence as he once again charged ahead, sniffing out every other corner in the room. This didn't alert Rachel in any way though. He often overreacted to the silliest of things. All that was needed was for a fox to pop into the garden for a few minutes to set him off for an hour. And as the rumbling car that sat outside sped off with an obnoxiously loud roar, she felt she had finally figured out what was going on. With that, she flicked off the light, scooped Buddy up in her arms, and began to scratch behind his ear once again, instantly taking his mind off the dangers he could sense. Soon enough, Rachel was face down, starfished on her bed as she always was, her right hand hanging over the edge of the mattress so she could feel Buddy's breathing. He always spent the first half an hour in bed with her before getting too hot and moving to the floor, but she found his presence so comforting that she still tried to keep him close. It had become a bit of a routine for the two, always finishing up with him licking her fingers before dozing off to sleep himself. She must have been tired though, as it was only as he began to lick her fingertips that she finally fell fast asleep. This was good though. She needed it. And it was already way past midnight, meaning she was to be up for work in 6.5 hours already. Unfortunately though, this wasn't going to be an easy night for her, and within an hour, she was awoken once again to a strange sound that echoed across the landing. It almost sounded like a ping from the distance. She huffed as she rolled onto her back, her eyes still closed as her sleepy mind drifted in and out of her half-sleep. Although it came again, and then again, consistently pinging through the air every few seconds. By now, Rachel had woken up a little more, and with her mind a bit sharper, she had realized that what she could hear was dripping. "Buddy, go turn off the tap," she whispered, joking to herself in an attempt to relieve the frustration she could already feel burning up in her chest. The last thing she needed was to stress herself out, resulting in even less sleep than she was already getting. So she sharply pulled herself out of bed and made her way across the landing to the bathroom. She didn't bother turning on the lights, trying to keep her tired eyes as assimilated to the dark as possible. In fact, she was very prompt with it, stepping inside, twisting the sink taps as hard as she could, and skulking straight back to bed. She quickly got herself back into her most comfortable position, lowering her hand over the edge of the bed so Buddy could calm her anxious heart once again. A task that he took up willingly. He was her savior in that sense. She could already feel herself drifting back to sleep as she felt his tongue gently rub against the side of her hand, tasting the sweat from her palm. Although this was seemingly no match for the now dreaded dripping that filled the air once again. This time, she knew there was no way she was going to be able to ignore it, and so she didn't fight it. Instantly jumping to her feet, charging out of the room again. She gripped the sink's taps once more, twisting them so tightly the metal began to creak, powered by an extra level of irritation that came with every second she was still awake. Surely now the dripping would stop. She stood there to ensure she had finally rectified the problem. But unfortunately, the dripping continued. Although, now that she was in the bathroom, she could finally hear its origins. It wasn't coming from the sink at all. It was coming from the shower, a factor she hadn't considered since it had been hours since she had one. She flicked on the dim light that reached out over the bathroom mirror, filling the room with a soft, pale glow, giving her a better look at what she was seeing. It was strange. The shower curtain was pulled across, its white drapes curved around the bath. In all of her time living here, she had never closed those drapes behind her, always making a point to open them so the room felt bigger. A slight dash of caution began to creep over her thoughts as she edged closer to the bathtub, now noticing the strange metallic smell that seemed to be emitting from inside. Something unusual was happening. That much was clear as the dripping continued, splatting against the porcelain of the tub below. She reached out, slowly gripping the edge of the shower curtain firmly in a fist, as if a part of her had already begun to suspect the worst. At first, she pulled back gently, revealing what looked to be a thick pool of blood converging at the bottom of the tub. And with that sight, a sudden panic smashed against her insides, resulting in her flinging the curtain back fully, revealing the horrifying sight of Buddy hanging upside down from the shower. He had been mutilated. Rachel screamed in dismay, instantly jumping back and tripping over the toilet seat, stumbling against the doorway as she half fell to the floor. She didn't know what to do, slumping down to the ground in absolute disbelief and horror. Although this was not to be the end of her horrifying tale, as she noticed that somebody had taken the liberty of scrawling a message in Buddy's blood across the tiles above the shower. A message that simply read, "Humans can lick too." The legend of humans can lick too, also known as the licked hand and doggy lick, has proven to have remarkable staying power across several decades, evolving through various iterations whilst maintaining its core elements of vulnerability, false security, and eventual shocking revelation. The most common version of the tale shared in modern times features, as they often do, a young girl walking home alone, with only her dog for protection. During this, she hears the news of a killer on the loose in the area and promptly rushes home, where she secures her house to keep her safe. Although, unbeknownst to her, she accidentally leaves at least one entry point unlocked. What that is varies from telling to telling, but more often than not, it's a window. A few hours later, she awakes in the middle of the night to the sound of mysterious dripping sound, but is far too frightened to properly investigate it. Interestingly, and as is often the case in these types of urban legends, the adults are nowhere to be seen, either being written out of the story entirely or simply ignored, leaving the girl and her dog alone at the center of the danger. In the story, the dog, as they do, makes her feel safer, and she finds his presence reassuring, reaching over to the side of the bed where he begins to lick at her hand. This continues throughout the night, helping her relax and go back to sleep. However, when she wakes up, she finds the dog is no longer beside her and goes to look for him, only to find that he has been brutally mutilated and hung up in the bathroom, with the dripping sound she had heard all night proving to be the dog's blood. Even more horrifyingly, somebody has dipped their fingers into the continuously forming pool of blood and written a message on the wall simply saying, "Humans can lick too." It is worth noting that, although it's more often than not a young woman or girl in these stories, there are also iterations where the protagonist is instead a nearsighted older woman, allowing the story to target different audiences' anxieties and fears. The fate of the dog itself changes from iteration to iteration too, ranging from gruesome to absolutely horrifying. In some variations, the dog has simply been stabbed, although more often than not, storytellers go much further, with some skinning the dog completely or disemboweling it. The message scrawled across the wall is always the same, enforcing the title of the urban legend, although where this message is found within the story does have slight variations of its own. It is often on the bathroom wall as stated previously, although it can also be found in mirrors, on floors, or even closet doors on the occasions where the dog is found in the closet instead. The endings also have several variations, with some concluding with the dead dog and the message that came with it. However, some extend the horrors further, revealing that the killer is still somewhere in the house, whether that be in the closet, the basement, or even still hiding under the bed. As you can imagine, these iterations often end with the girl being murdered. Some take the story in a slightly different direction, making it more eerie and unnerving than gruesome. In these versions, there is a parent at home too, who comes across the killer hiding somewhere in the house. In other iterations, though, the killer is never found, and the story is told more as a haunting close call, as they come home to tell her that the dog has been locked away elsewhere all night, so it couldn't have been the one that was licking her hand. Interestingly, despite this legend feeling like a modern urban legend, it is actually older than most, with the earliest documented example of the legend dating as far back as 1871. This was in a story that we have already delved into during our Aren't You Glad You Didn't Turn On the Lights chapter, another urban legend that has branched from this one over the years. It was Dearman Birchall, a Victorian diarist and country squire, who recorded a story he heard at a party one night, telling of a man whose wife had urged him to investigate possible burglars in their home at night. The man, dismissing her concerns, instead reached out his hand and felt what he assumed to be their dog licking his fingers. It was only the following morning that they realized they had, in fact, been robbed, meaning the intruders had been in the room even as he reassured himself with what he assumed was the dog licking his fingers. Folklorists often point to Birchall's entry as one of the earliest written examples of the narrative built on false reassurance and the unsettling belief that danger can be close enough to touch, yet mistaken for something familiar. Although curiously, this earlier depiction lacked much of the horror that would later be injected into the narrative. However, it still managed to establish much of the eerie deception at the heart of the tale. This motif evolved further in M.R. James's short story published in 1919. Titled The Diary of Mr. Pointer, it tells of a man dozing off in his armchair, believing he is petting his dog, only to discover that he has actually been stroking long strands of hair attached to a hairy, human-like shape. James wasn't directly adapting the 1871 anecdote, but he was shaping that familiar core anxiety that something unknown and unwanted can slip into the space we assume is safe. In folklore studies, this falls under a recognized narrative motif, the act of mistaking a human presence for an animal in the dark, a pattern that appears in stories across different cultures and time periods, from Little Red Riding Hood type tales where a girl mistakes a predator for a relative in a darkened bed, to Irish puka stories of riders who assume a talking horse is just an animal, or Caribbean Lugaroo legends where night sounds are dismissed as a stray creature rather than a human witch. The shift in this story into a more violent interpretation over the years seems to reflect the growing anxieties that appeared in the late 20th century. At this point, it wasn't the idea of a monstrous being that frightened people. It was the deranged ideas lurking in the minds of human beings that surrounded us. In fact, you can clearly see a significant rise in serial killer urban legends appearing around the world during this time, as our culture's morbid curiosity and fear expanded into tales of crime and serial killer behavior. According to documentation, it was David Martin Brown, writing under the name D.B. Martin, who published Bedtime for Sam in February 1982. And it was the events that took place in this story that set off this new, violent interpretation. And this is widely considered to be the key source for its contemporary form. Although undated oral versions may have circulated earlier amongst teenagers and babysitters, this remains the first verifiable printed source of the modern tale. This version was popularized even further when it was included in folklorist Jan Harold Brunvan's influential collection, The Choking Doberman, published in 1984, and with this, the story had been cemented as a legend of American urban folklore, where it has remained for decades. By the 1990s, the story had become so widely known that it had begun appearing across the early internet, spreading far and wide through chain mails, often followed by the familiar warning, "Forward this on, or something bad will happen." It had proven its longevity, evolving and changing to suit the new sensibilities of the modern world, morphing to pull at the anxieties that came with it, slipping from page to voice to screen without ever quite losing its edge. Somewhere along the way, it stopped belonging to any single author and became something else entirely, passed on in late-night conversation, kept alive by the fears that we all feel. If you're still listening, you likely share the same fascination with strange stories and unexplained legends that I do. For just £3 a month on Patreon, you'll unlock Modern Myths, an exclusive bonus series released in the week between our chapters, ensuring that you get an episode a week. You'll also get behind-the-scenes insights, discounts on merch, and access to our private community chat where you can connect with me and other folklore fans. I even name characters in my stories after patrons at random, so your name could become part of the retellings themselves. Your support fuels the research and the production and ensures our understanding of these legends continue to grow. Click the Patreon link in the show notes to join us, and together we'll keep folklore alive. But for now, back to the legend. While this story is a work of folklore, rather than a retelling of a specific crime, there are real-world incidents that echo its most unsettling elements, such as a hidden intruder, the sense of being watched inside your own home, and even the targeting of pets during break-ins. Across the last few decades, police reports have documented cases where intruders secretly lived inside homes for days or even weeks before being discovered, slipping out only when the occupants slept. There have been break-ins where the first sign of danger was a disturbed room or a missing pet, and incidents where burglars quietly entered bedrooms at night while people were asleep only a few feet away. In some cases, investigators found that the intruder had watched the household's routines, waiting for the moment they felt most unprotected. Now, none of these events match the legend directly, but each of them separately reflect the same unnerving truth it draws upon: that the boundary between safety and intrusion is far thinner than we like to believe. There is also a deeper psychological layer to the legend, a factor that undeniably adds to the story: the horror of harm coming to a family pet. Studies in trauma and media psychology consistently show that audiences react more strongly to violence against animals than to violence against adults, likely due to the fact that pets occupy a symbolic space of innocence and unconditional trust within us. They are seen as extensions of the home itself, guardians who bridge the gap between the outside world and our private lives. It's why entire websites exist, simply to reassure viewers whether the dog dies in a film. People want to know in advance if that particular emotional line will be crossed. In folklore and in real fears alike, the thought of an intruder targeting a pet hits at something primal, playing on the idea that even the gentlest presence in the home can become a casualty of someone else's evil. Then there's a deeper terror that comes with being alone, only to find that you are not truly alone at all. This fear is extremely primal, rooted in our earliest human instincts, tied to the idea of unseen predators lurking in the dark. But perhaps the most disturbing element is the intimacy of the act described in the story. The gesture of a dog licking its owner's hands is a moment of pure domestic reassurance for them, as is often the case in real life. However, the story takes the concept and flips it on its head, corrupting the moment entirely. To reach out into the dark and be met with what you think is affection, only for it to actually be a human tongue, creates one of the most viscerally upsetting inversions in folklore. It weaponizes trust. It turns comfort into contamination. It forces the listener to confront the idea that something we interpret as love or reassurance might, in reality, be a predator in disguise. There is also the fear of being violated in our own home. Our homes are supposed to be the one place where the outside world cannot reach us. And this legend dismantles that illusion effortlessly. The intruder doesn't just break in. He moves through the house silently, kills the dog, writes a message, and remains close enough to touch the protagonist. It is the ultimate breach of privacy, autonomy, and control, with an underlying sexual undertone to it, with the licking of the hand without consent. Another psychological layer lies in the story's use of sensory misinterpretation. We rely on our senses to determine safety, yet here, the senses betray the victim, misinterpreting a very real threat as a comforting lick. Then there's the annoying sound of a dripping tap, which actually proves itself to really be blood. And in that sense, this legend forces its audience to confront the terrifying possibility that their own senses might fail them when they are needed most. Finally, the message on the wall provides the perfect folkloric sting. It confirms the worst possibility in the simplest words, delivering the reveal in a way that feels mocking, giving it an extra sinister layer. In the tale, the killer has not only entered the home and murdered the dog, he has taken the time to taunt the victim, leaving behind a note that turns the entire night into a grotesque joke at her expense. Luckily for us though, in reality, it would be extremely difficult for a killer to get inside and kill a dog without the dog making a sound, especially if it was anything bigger than a small breed. Then there's the somewhat more acceptable fact that a killer in the real world that had broken in with the intention of harm would only discard the dog if it was getting in their way, before continuing with their intended crime, without any of these theatrics being needed. The legend serves as an important social and psychological warning, operating as a cautionary tale about the vulnerabilities that come with being alone and the potential dangers of incomplete home security. But with that is a deeper aspect. Over time, we naturally grow complacent and comfortable in our routines. We learn the familiar sounds of our homes. We trust our pets, and we begin to assume that what we feel and hear each night will always mean the same thing. Just like in this story, those expectations of normality can blind us to the real dangers that surround us. At its heart, the legend is about how easily we let habit stand in for awareness. The girl in the story doesn't question the licking at her hand because she already believes she knows what it is. That small leap of assumption is what allows the intruder to exist in the same room as her without being challenged. It is a reminder that the things which comfort us most, such as our routines, pets, and sense of home, can become the very tools that allow us to overlook warning signs until it's too late. With how deeply these fears resonate, it's no surprise that the legend has been repeatedly mined and reshaped across modern media. As with many of the enduring urban legends out there, Humans Can Lick Too has transcended its origins to become a shared cultural touchstone, referenced across various media formats. It was first picked up by horror cinema in the late 1990s and early 2000s, as filmmakers began to raid these legends for inspiration. In fact, the 1997 anthology Campfire Tales includes a segment in which a girl home alone with her dog found the menacing message written in their room where she believed that she had been with her dog. A few years later, in Urban Legend's final cut, the film actually opened with a meta, film within a film take on the story, staging the dead dog, the dripping, and the blood-written line as the first urban legend kill of the sequel's tale. In the follow-up to this, Urban Legend's Bloody Mary, they, for some reason, came back to reenact this legend again, having its vengeful ghost use a licked hand-style trick as one of the ways to murder a character. And on top of that, it's also featured in several television shows, including the likes of Supernatural. In our more recent years, it's found itself retold often once more, now appearing in podcast episodes devoted to urban legends like this, on YouTube channels breaking down the scariest sleepover stories, and appearing on countless Reddit threads where people try to track down the first time they heard that dog story where it turns out the man was licking her hand. The details often change, and will likely continue to do so, with some even already adding that, instead of the message being left for the victim, a voice emerges from the dark, saying the words out loud. Although, even with all of these changes, the core aspect of humans can lick too has remained very much the same. This persistence speaks to its effectiveness as a tale that manages to activate our primal fears from generation to generation, particularly those involving vulnerability during sleep and the violation of safe spaces. Over time, the legend has proven itself to be entirely fictional, with no real-life counterpart that mirrors the tale in any real or meaningful way. Instead, its reflection of the real world is more within its psychology regarding isolation, trust, and the dangers that could still make their way into our seemingly secure environments.
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Morgie, co-edited by Sophie Tickle, music by Billy Japp, with additional sounds from Storyblocks and Envato. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please like and review our show on your chosen podcast provider. This simple task is a big part of our show's continuation and growth. To access more chapters through our bonus material, early releases, ad-free content and more, become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. To follow us on TikTok, Instagram or YouTube, simply search Urban Legends Folklore or visit lukemorgie.com/podcast. If you have more information or a correction on anything said, email us on luke@lukemorgie.com. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority.